I recently spoke to a friend who has been working from home since 2020. His job switched over during COVID, like a lot of people, to fully remote, and they were accommodating that really well. But in the past 4 years, his company has gone from fully remote to a lot of people are being asked to do hybrid. So they're in the office 2 days a week. And now, again, for like the millionth time, they're threatening for everyone to return to the office. And my friend feels like he's in a pickle. He said, they've tried this before. He said every time the employees, they threaten to go find other jobs if they're forced to return to the office. And even himself, he's been sort of putting the feelers out there for other jobs that might give him the flexibility that he likes with the remote work environment. And this is becoming more and more common. And employers don't know quite what to do about this. Employees are not sure. But I want to talk a little bit about how Christians can think about this. I don't know where the power struggle between employer and employee is going to end. Most employers, I think, want workers in the office, while most employees probably want the freedom that comes from working from home. So there is this sort of impasse. And so there's been a lot of this move towards hybrid and all of that, which is very interesting. A lot of different research on where that's going. But what I want to focus on is, what should my friend do? Or maybe what should you do if you find yourself in a similar situation? Remote work is very tempting. I think for a lot of us, it's very enjoyable. But what I want to do here is I want to offer 3 pieces of advice that focus on what you can control when it comes to this idea of remote work. Should I seek out a job for that? Should I leave my current job for that benefit? What happens if my job is sending me back to the office? Should I quit and do another thing? How do we think about this, and how do I actually live as a faithful remote worker? That's sort of big picture we're going to look at, but we're going to focus in on the heart of a Christian remote worker. So I was actually inspired to talk about this. Scott Balavia's article was really good in the Institute for Faith and Work and Economics. I shared this a few weeks back in my weekly newsletter, which, by the way, if you're not on the newsletter, you should be. Weekly, I send out a roundup of the best articles, best resources I found throughout the week on Christian productivity. It has a lot of commentary from me. I often share whatever new resources I've put out. People love it. Just to be humble, I get lots of great feedback about it all the time. And if you want a really helpful, encouraging, inspiring newsletter that's going to help you be more productive as a Christian, check it out. You can find more at redeemingproductivity.com. And if you do sign up, I send you this PDF morning routine planner that'll help you set up a Christ-honoring morning routine, just as a thank you. Anyway, back to this. So Scott's article was really good. And he basically talked about, how does God care about how I work? Does he care if I do remote work or not remote work? And he has a lot of really good insights, and a lot of his also points at the heart. But I was also reminded way back in 2021, when so many had switched over to remote work and were dealing with this issue, I actually wrote a 2-article series on a Christian's guide to remote work. And I'll include links to those articles in the show notes if you're interested. But what I want to do here is sort of give an update to that. How should we as Christians be thinking about remote work today when the environment's changed a lot? There's a lot more opportunities for remote work. There's also a lot of companies that are doing this hybrid thing. Big picture, how do we think about it? How do we adjust our hearts accordingly? So one thing Scott pointed out in his article was this study that came out, I think it was in January. Yeah, it says it there, January 12th of 2024. And this was LinkedIn did this study on the global state of remote and hybrid work. And one of the things that's really interesting about this study is it shows just how wide the divide is between employers and employees on this issue of remote work. They found that just 9.5% of job postings were for remote work. So catch that. On LinkedIn, where people post a job posting, less than 10% of those, less than 1 in 10, were for remote work. But on the other side of it, 45.9% of applications, almost half of all applications that came through there, were for remote position. So you see, there's a wide gap. There's a supply and demand issue here. People want to have fully remote jobs, but there's not a ton of them out there, and that landscape's changing all the time. So how do we think about this? How do we adjust our heart? How do we approach this in a godly way when we think about our careers and remote work, etc.? So here's how we're going to tackle it. We're going to look at three things. We're going to look at the remote work and the heart. That's sort of our theme. And we're going to talk about first appreciating the blessings of remote work, beware of the temptations of it, and exploit the opportunities. So let's first look at appreciate the blessings. Appreciate the blessings. There are many blessings that come with remote work. Will be the first to admit it. I love it. I've been working from home for the past 3 years now, and I absolutely love it. I love the flexibility. I love the fact that it gives me more time with my family, right? I don't have to commute, which earns me back a lot of time. It helps me keep up with the household chores, help out a little bit. I can kind of go and go for a walk in the middle of the day and come back. I just like the freedom that comes from it, and specifically freedom from office distractions. I'm not the most social person, to be honest with you. And one of the things that I always found frustrating working in an office was I wanted to get work done, but a lot of times people just want to chat. And so that kind of wasn't as much of a distraction working at home. And so I think we do need to appreciate the blessings and be clear that, yeah, these are genuine blessings. These aren't things to be overlooked. These are, we should appreciate them and give thanks to God for them. Those are true, helpful, good things. Remote work, lots of good stuff about it. And so how should I think about these blessings? Well, not as a right, but as a gift, right? That's the big heart shift I think we have to get right if we're going to act and think in a Christian way about the blessing of remote work, right? Remote work is not my right. Say it with me. It's not my right. Isn't it so funny how quickly we can take a blessing and turn it into, take it for granted? We can take a blessing and turn it into an idol like overnight. In fact, even this week, I have to admit to you, I caught myself saying, someone was asking me, oh, how do you like working from home? And I said, I would never go back to an office. Oof. Am I really going to say that? As a Christian who's a steward of this life, who serves God, I serve at the pleasure of the King of Kings. I'm gonna say, no, I would never do that. That's not the right heart to have. And that's something I had to repent of as well, is recognizing this isn't a right. This mode of work, lots of blessings, not a right. We also got to be careful of idolizing our work situation. As I said, I want to be someone who's willing to go wherever God sends me. I think it's funny, sometimes we'll say this, like even when it comes to missions, we'll be like, oh, if God sends me to, the darkest part of the world to go be a missionary, I'm ready to go. And yet, when it comes to like actual reality, which is if God sends me back to the office, there's no way I'm doing that, right? Do you see the disparity? We think our faith is this big heroic thing. Oh, if God calls me to do this big thing, that's gonna be great. But what if it's a much more small thing? What if it's just by comparison, a small inconvenience of, oh, God's called you through your vocation to go back to the office. Are you really going to turn around and be like, no, Lord, that's a bridge too far? I mean, it's silly when we actually think about it, but that's why we have to be keeping such a close guard on our hearts. We can't idolize the blessing of a specific work situation. And again, this goes beyond just remote work versus in office. Even a specific job, you got to be willing to change careers if that's what the Lord's calling you to do. Even if you're in a really cushy position, even if it means a downgrade in pay sometimes, right? It's having that heart attitude of, I'm a servant of God. I will go where he sends me. This life and my work is a stewardship from God. It's not my right. It's not about my comfort. It's about his glory. Last thing I'll say on this about appreciating the blessings is you have to accept that the blessing may come to an end. The Lord may have something different for us in the future. My friend, who I opened up at the beginning talking about, he's enjoyed this wonderful blessing of remote work for these past several years, and now it seems like that might come to an end. And certainly, I mean, he's free to go look for other jobs, right? He wants to obviously submit your plans to the Lord, even as you submit your applications. But you also have to, this is all downstream from that recognizing remote work isn't a right. You've got to accept that this thing that's been a great blessing, it might have just been for a season. And that's okay. I can still give thanks to God for it. I can still that was awesome. That was a great season. While my kids were young or during this special season, I got to spend more time at home, all that. Awesome. But maybe it's coming to him. Maybe he has something different for you. And you want to have, again, that servant's heart for if and when that day comes. So that's the first point here, is we got to appreciate the blessings of it. I think you even see this in Colossians 3. It says, "And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." You see that there's this attitude of, I want to serve the Lord through my speech and through my deeds. So I think that would include, and whatever you do includes your work, right? And so I want to do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. I want to recognize that my work is not about me, it's about him. And I want to do it with that attitude of gratitude, giving thanks to the Father through him. That's how our approach to work should be marked. All right, let's look at the second point here about remote work in the heart, and that is beware of the temptations. There are, with remote work, many temptations to sin, right? And I think we have to be aware of these, that along with the blessings, it does have pros and it does have cons. There's temptations that come with being a remote worker. Just to name a few would be laziness, right? No one's watching me that closely, and so I can kind of slack off. I can do less work than I would have done in the office, and that is a temptation, is to not work with integrity. We can also do, this is really closely related, we can do fake work. I think there's still people doing this. I think it's on Reddit, there's a thing called r/overemployed. I think that's what it's called, the overemployed movement. And the idea was, in the age of remote work, several people figured out that if they were smart about it, they could get 2, possibly 3, some people even 5 jobs at the same time with different employers, especially in the tech space. And so there was people that were making $1 million or more a year doing low-level, sometimes mid-level tech jobs, and people still do this. I've read about them even recently, where they're getting paid all these different paychecks. And you're like, how do they do it? They do fake work. What do I mean fake work? I don't mean they're sending like fraudulent work or something like that. I mean that they do the things that make it look like you're working. So they're super responsive on email, super responsive on Slack. They quickly get back to people. They seem like a superstar on the communication side, and they have different delay tactics to actually get to keep people off their back from saying, hey, you're not getting anything done. And that fake work, even if you're not doing that, which I think is unethical, by the way, because you end up having to lie or deceive to do that. But even if you're not overemployed, you can often find yourself doing that fake work. You know that day that you're like, man, it's such a nice day. I'm going to cut out early and go to the beach, but I'm not going to tell my boss. I'm just going to have my phone with me and I'm going to respond to emails. And you're feeling a little bit guilty the whole time because you know you're not doing everything on the up and up, but you kind of calculated what are the fake work things I can do to keep up with stuff. Now, just as an aside, if you have that understanding with your employer, I don't think you need to feel guilty about that they're like, hey, if you want to cut early, just keep up with things, that's fine. But I think there is a version of this, we all know it, when we're being a little bit deceitful. That's not a great idea. And I think just still on the topic of beware the temptations of remote work, I think one of the big ones that's related to all of these is justifying our indolence. So justifying our indolence, making ourselves feel not so bad about what we know we shouldn't be doing. We always do this. We have a tendency to try to justify our sin, right? We say, well, I wouldn't have done that. My kids do this all the time. Well, I only hit her because she hit me, right? But we do this in work too. We say, well, it's such a big company and like they can afford not to do that. They don't appreciate me enough. Other people work less than I do and they get by. So why should I have to do it? I think one of the biggest ones that helps us to justify sort of inactivity, doing less than we know we ought to be doing, less than we're being paid to do, is this feeling underappreciated. I had this graphic that says what you do versus what they say. If you're watching the YouTube version, you can see it on the screen. But what they see, it's the same size. So what you do might be a really small amount or it might be a really big amount. But often, especially in a company, what they see is the same. And so we have this frustration often of that dude does nothing and he's always getting accolades for it. I work so much and they think, oh, he's doing the same amount as that guy or less than that guy. And it's so frustrating and it leads to this attitude of, well, if I'm not appreciated, I'm not going to work hard. Do you think that that's a Christian attitude? Yes, it can be frustrating if we're working really hard and it goes unnoticed, but we have to remember that we're not working for the notice of our employer. We're not working for their appreciation. We're working for the Lord. We read in 1 Samuel 16:7, but the Lord says to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. This is why having a great heart attitude as a remote worker is so important, right? That last phrase, man looks on the outward appearances, but the Lord looks on the heart. If I'm just working for my employer's approval and just trying not to get fired, which a lot of people, that's sort of the standard nowadays. I'm just trying not to get fired. I do as little as possible. You're not working from the heart. The heart, when we're working from the heart, we're recognizing that it's only the Lord who judges that. That my employer, I want to please them. I want to do good by them. I want to be working with integrity. But ultimately, if I'm working for the Lord, I'm focused on what's my heart in this. And that's why we have to beware of justifying our indolence, of that laziness, of that cutting corner stuff that does become, frankly, easier when someone's not looking over your shoulder in an office. The other verse I would point out to you is Colossians 3:23-24. Bring this one up all the time. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. That's the key. You're working not for men, you're working for the Lord. That's the heart attitude of a Christian remote worker. The people can't see me. It doesn't matter. I'm going to work well because I'm working for God. Verse 24 goes on, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You're serving the Lord Christ. He's saying God is the one who rewards you. It's not that, they looked me over for promotion even though I worked really hard. Doesn't matter. That's not who you're working for. You're working for God, who sees it all. And more importantly, sees your heart in all of it. So you might be able to fake results for a while. You may even fool your employer, but God is never deceived even for a moment. And those who work from the heart, they don't take shortcuts because they know God has an unblinking bird's eye view of the racetrack and he sees it. And so work for him and beware the temptations that come from, well, if they don't see, I'm not going to care. Well, God sees and he does care. Third and final point I want to make here on remote work in the heart is exploit the opportunities. The reason we want to operate with integrity while working from home, that's kind of what we were talking about, living with integrity while working from home, working with integrity while working from home. The reason we do that is because we want to please the Lord. So our main reason for operating with integrity while working from home is to please the Lord. But a secondary reason is that we can glorify God by shining as a light to those we work with, even in a remote environment. And we can do that by approaching remote work with this proper heart attitude and exploiting the unique opportunities to be a faithful worker in these environments. Lean into the blessings with a clear conscience. So take the blessings that God has given you and say, I'm going to appreciate those and use those blessings that we talked about in point 1, the flexibility, the being at home, the time with the family, lack of commute. I'm going to accept those as gifts from God. I'm going to enjoy them, but I'm going to make sure I do that with a clear conscience. I'm not going to sneak away. I'm not going to be doing fake work. I'm not going to be doing stuff that I know that my manager or whoever I report to would not be pleased with because I'm trying to be a little snake. You don't want to do that. You don't want to work against your conscience. You want to enjoy those blessings, yes, but do it with a clear conscience. And I think a big part of the way we do that is by communicating. We communicate, hey, I'm going to do this. Is it okay if I do this? Here's the truth, guys. Your managers at work take advantage of these blessings too. They're going for walks in the middle of the day. They're going and running errands while answering email on their phone and staying available on Slack or Teams or whatever. They're doing that. So if you say to them, hey, is it okay if sometimes I do this? Have that conversation once and they'll say, yeah, just don't do too much or whatever. Then you can do it with a clear conscience. It's not a hard conversation. They're not going to be like, no, I expect you to be at your desk all the time. They don't expect that, honestly. So just have those conversations so you can enjoy the blessings with a clear conscience and not feel like I'm doing something wrong. Another opportunity to exploit is demonstrating a Christ-honoring work ethic. It is unique in a remote work environment because a lot of people do exploit these opportunities negatively to take advantage of them. But what we want to do is we want to take advantage of the opportunities of remote work to do over and above, to say, hey, I'm going to look at this unique work situation as a way to uniquely bless the employer the Lord's given me. I'm going to do things like over communicate. I'm going to do things like exceeding their expectations, right? That these are opportunities for you to exploit the remote work thing. Not take advantage of it, but exploit it positively for the honor of God and for the being blessing to your employer. One way to do this is to over communicate. This graphic I made, if you're watching, it's like a little text message thread, and it says, in the age of remote work, a proactive communicator is a blessing to their employer. This is one of the best things you can do to serve the people you work for, to operate with integrity, and even just to ease your own conscience, and even just for your own career. Be a good communicator. It's necessary now more than ever has been before, now in the age of remote work. So do that. Exploit the opportunity of saying, hey, I'm just going to be a proactive communicator. I'm saying, I'm doing this. Hey, what about this today? Don't just leave everybody hanging, because then they don't know what's going on. So do this, but do it from the heart attitude of, I want to bless my employer by communicating well. And like I said, too, exceeding expectations. I got another graphic up here. There's this quote from John C. Maxwell. He says, disappointment is the gap that exists between expectation and reality. There's an expectation your employer has, and then there's reality. I don't want to fall short of that and produce disappointment, that line of expectation. I want to exceed the line of expectation and bring them joy and bring them satisfaction and serve them well. And we want to do this. We want to do this because it blesses them, because it honors the Lord. And like I said, it's actually good for you in your career. This isn't the main reason you want to do it, but it is, in a sense, self-serving in a positive way. It says in Proverbs 10:9, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. There's this idea, Jesus talked about that, be sure your sins will find you out. When you walk with an unclear conscience, knowing you're cutting corners, knowing you're doing stuff that you ought not to be doing, not sure, you're kind of operating in this gray area, eventually you're found out. And I've had this happen to friends that I know that were taking advantage of remote work situations. And even I had a friend that was bragging about it, that they said, I almost don't work anymore because they had this remote job and they knew how to do the fake work and cut the corners. Guess what happened to them? Eventually they were found out. Eventually they were fired from that. And so we have to walk with integrity. And part of that is a blessing to you to walk with integrity, not just to have that clear conscience, but because eventually you're going to be found out if you try to cut corners for too long. I'm curious what you think about this issue of remote work and the heart. Is this something you think about? Is this something that is helpful to you? What are some areas that you feel convicted in, that you think you need to be doing better in? Are you in a situation where you're feeling a lack of gratitude, where you're feeling sort of, oh, hang on, I've been taking advantage of this? Or are you in a space where you've taken it for granted, all these blessings, and feel like, oh, I could never go back? Good time to do a heart check. Good time to bring yourself before the Lord and say, hey, I want to serve you, Lord, whatever it is. I want to do that, even if it's a less ideal situation than this. But if you do give me this ideal situation, Lord, I'm going to be thankful and I'm going to use it well for your glory. Love to hear your thoughts, any feedback, anything you want to share. Let me know in the comments on YouTube or on Spotify, and I will see you again here next week.